Okay, sorry for the delay. The truth is I was just at the barbecue. I was trying to get a taste, since my topic is a vision for tomorrow, prediction of what the world will look like in the next decade. So I was thinking whether this is what it will look like 24/7. How's that? And that's it. That's my talk for this day. Except you won't gain weight. How do you like that? That would be it.
Will we go taller?
Jacobson, I need your cooperation here. And yeah. So, hello. Good afternoon. Yes, we're here to talk about this topic. But what I just said is, even though it may sound like a joke, but actually, Maimonides, the Rambam, writes when he depicts the future. So he has an expression that says "Madanim mitzion ka'ofer," which means the lights, pleasures, will be so abundant they'll be like dust. That's why I made reference. But there also the emphasis that it'll be like dust, meaning it'll be so plentiful we won't even notice it. You know, it's like they say diamonds are only valuable when they're rare. If diamonds were lying all over the beaches like dust, like sand at the beach by waterside, it wouldn't be valuable. So let's talk about the future. It's one of, I think, a vital element in life. In general, to have a bigger picture. I spoke about it somewhat at the Trump talk a few days ago, which I'm sure many of you were there. No, I'm not going to talk about Trump now. But it is essentially a critical way to look at life by asking yourself a question, whether you look at the small picture or the big picture. Now, there's some people that are big picture individuals. They look at the landscape. They have a bird's eye view. Actually, the expression of the Talmud would be Ezu Chacham, who's the wise person? Haroya Sanelid, that sees the birthing, which really means sees the future. Not a prophet and not the crystal ball, but looks at the consequences of things. Many of us just act and we worry about what will happen later. Some people are big picture people. The downside is they sometimes are so big picture they don't know how to deal with the present. You know, they're on the 30,000 foot level, but they don't know how to deal with the ground level. And then there are others, probably the majority of people that are more on the ground, deal with things in context of the here and now. And of course the downside of that is that something may be very pleasurable, instant gratification, or some other short-term gain at the expense of long-term loss, which is really much more of the human condition than the former. Obviously, the best of both worlds is having a person who's able to look at the big picture and it informs the small picture. So what you do day by day, step by step, is informed by a larger journey toward a destination. I want to, before I phrase this in another terminology, I want to just give a little introduction, a story that I always share, which is critical about language. Language is a very important component in this discussion for the following reason. You know, we all have our stereotypes. I think it's a topic I'm going to talk about in a few days from now, one of these sessions. But we all have our stereotypes. We all have our biases and prejudices based on our experiences. And that's why, for myself as a communicator, I'm always very careful what words to use. Because it's not just what word you use, it's also what word not to use. Because certain words are loaded, and the reaction is not what you want to convey. Even the word like God, you know, I'm sure a crowd like this, yourselves, it may be a fine word to use. But for many people, God is not a good word to use, not because there's a problem with God, it's the problem with people, how people interpret what God is. And using Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Barditchever's famous line, where he said to a self-proclaimed atheist, the God you don't believe in, I also don't believe in. Just, if you think about it, unbelievable point, meaning that before we debate the issue, first let's define what we mean. So I have a story that happened with me early years of my career. I was teaching classes and continued to teach a Wednesday night class that's been going on for many, many years. Maybe one of the longest running classes in our time. Began in 1982. So that's a long time ago. That's like, but that's pre-email and pre-internet. It's when we still used camels and donkeys to, more or less, it was before the war, before many wars. In 1982, so I was giving this, so people in the core group of my class were people from the arts and entertainment industry. Artists of different types, and mostly Jewish, some not Jewish, but they were very spiritual type of people, but very non-traditional. They would not tell you that their spirituality came from Judaism. They would say it probably came from things like Zen Buddhism or LSD, etc. So I being trying to convey ideas, I realized that I was at a disadvantage in a way, even before I opened my mouth. Because here I was sitting with a beard and a yarmulke, and trying to teach, trying to communicate. And I may be stereotyping these people without them even knowing it. I may be reminding some people of an angry grandfather that schlepped them to synagogue in Yom Kippur, or irrelevant Hebrew school teacher, or other things of that nature, or even positive memories. But it was definitely not a neutral image. So I tried an experiment. And I say it because I think it's very vital, even in a talk like this, even to a captive audience, so to speak, we're on the same wavelength. But definitely to any type of audience. And that is that I tried the experiment. The experiment was I would not use any religious language in my discussion. No God, no Torah, no mitzvah. Instead, I created this whole language which was basically neutral, universal. The language was, I used words, instead of God, I used words like higher power or higher essence, the essence of reality. And if it was a particularly New Age group, I used like an expression like layers of unconscious, undefined energy or something like that. And instead of Torah, I used the word blueprint or roadmap. Instead of mitzvahs, the word connections. Instead of Mashiach and Geula, redemption and Messiah, I used destination. And here I was waxing eloquent about this journey into the essence of reality, following a blueprint, making all these connections until the point where we reach a total fusion in the destination of it all, a total fusion of the inner and the outer, of energy and matter, of function and form, of body and soul, in one seamless unity. Okay? And I could tell you the people were like very intrigued, to the point of even mesmerized in a way, because I was going on like this, and it was so beautiful. It's like, what a vision. And after a few weeks, a guy came over to me. There was, in the 60s, a band called Jay and the Americans. I don't know if you remember. They had some hit songs. And one of the people in that group was called Kenny Vance. He comes over to me and says to me, "Are you talking about God?" Because I hadn't used that word or any word like that. So I said, "Yes, but don't spoil it for the others. Don't tell them." The experiment worked excellent, beyond my expectations, because what I did was essentially did not allow anyone to use words that would prejudice them due to their past experiences. It's a great exercise. Try it out. If you're in disagreement with someone, say with your spouse, and they go ballistic every time you say something, just say the same thing with completely new words. And you'd be surprised, you may get very different results. Because words are loaded. Words can be great tools for communication, but they also can be great barriers. Because a word I say may be innocuous to me, but it may drive you crazy because your mother said it every time she got angry or whatever. How would I know? So I say it because in the titles explicitly does not say anything. What is this vision for tomorrow? Prediction of what the world will look like in the next decade. I mean, in truth, should I spill the beans? Yes. Okay, why not? I really am talking about Geula Mashiach. That's what I'm talking about. A world of redemption. Now, I know once I said that, I want to see if anybody's going to walk out. Because they say, I didn't come for that. I came to hear about the future of the universe. Like the future trends and business opportunities and where should we invest, stuff like that. But in truth, it's the same thing. But now that I told my introduction, I respect you well enough to think that you will not be trapped by any stereotypes of any of the wording. So I just wanted to share that with you. I was really going to control myself to the last moment, but I decided, you know what? Let me give you the benefit of the doubt. I was going to say at the end, by the way, all I've been talking about is something that everybody has all kinds of issues with, or is neutral about. Because most people, you say the word Mashiach, okay, that's not for me, or it's embroiled with controversy. The next thing he's going to say that the Rebbe is Mashiach or something, you get the idea, or whatever other stuff. But in fact, I find it to be the most intriguing theme in all of Jewish thought, and frankly, not just Jewish thought, every religion and every system always has some utopian vision. Socialism, Marxism, communism was officially the thing that was so attractive, was the utopian vision. It wasn't viable, but there was a utopian vision that attracted people. Every system has that because it's all about that everything we do is leading us to a better world. So I'm going to speak about it in universal secular language. I just wanted to just share with you as insiders what I'm really talking about, okay? But it's the same thing. And that is exactly what I said about fusion. Fusion. That's something that every scientist and science from the beginning of time has been looking for. How do we find the unified field theory? Or in more specific terms, how do we find laws that can explain many phenomena? We live in a world that is filled with trillions of different organisms and components. And we're looking for what connects them all. So science, the real search of science seeks those unifying forces, those unifying laws, and that help us understand all the different types of phenomena. Just like we discovered this DNA or subatomic particles, these are all ways of understanding the basic building blocks which we all share. And therefore, looking toward the future, what we're really looking for is how will we ultimately achieve this unity. So there's many aspects to this, and I'll just go through, from a point of view, I'm going to go through on a political, and on economic, and on a technological and scientific, and finally spiritual dimension. 4 different so-called maps of how the evolution of history, where it's been, where it's where it's led us to, where we are now, and where we're headed. Because that's how we look at the big picture. And then, of course, the conclusion is how that informs the small picture, which means the right now, here and now, April, what is it? We're here with beyond time and space. It's like a casino. April 3rd, 2018, the 4th day of Pesach, is it? Yeah? Right? 5778. So, let's go through a little history because I think it makes it easier to understand the past. As I said, the past, what's led us to here, where we are, and where we're going. So generally speaking, from a point of more or less, this is essentially History 101, defines the history of the human race, more or less in these stages. That I'm going to start with the Agricultural Society because I want to go all the way back to the beginning of the first human beings. There was an agricultural revolution, which was essentially consisted of developing the tools and utensils to be able to harvest produce. Human beings cannot live without food, and food in the earlier years would have been through hunting, and then came a stage where, both through very primitive but basic technologies, we learned how to harvest the crops. And this turned into an agricultural revolution, which we call Agrarian Society, which was basically the first time that communities, as we know them, began to be built because they were all built around farms, large farmland, which is the place where you could access the food. Remember, we did not have then any long distance distribution, so you had to be close to where the food is if you're going to survive. And which means you need to either work on a farm or be right near one, and be a helper or trade, etc. The agricultural revolution led to what's called the Industrial Revolution, which would be now, we're talking now the 19th century. The agricultural stage was literally centuries old. Some say all the way back even to the 8th, 9th century, even earlier perhaps. I mean, even when you look in the Bible, in the Torah, basically what was the industries of the time? It's either you were shepherds, which was not yet agricultural perhaps all the way, but it was still a certain type of thing, or the Egyptians. Let's talk about Passover. How did Pharaoh and Egypt become a superpower? Because they stockpiled grain, which was food, and everybody needed them because of the famine. and that was the commodity of the times. So you can really say agriculture probably goes back even thousands of years. But I want to fast forward to the Industrial Revolution was the development of the first steps of what we call technologies, machines. Whether it was the combine, that was what I would say, or it was steam engines, or it was electricity, or it was the other things discovered essentially in the 19th century. They usually say the Industrial Revolution is around 1840. I'm mentioning that year for a reason. I'll get back to it later. And Industrial Revolution, of course, changed dramatically everything. Because once you have, let's say, trains, you can transport. You don't need to be near the source of the food. Once you have other technologies, you don't need a cow or another animal to plow the fields. You had the plow. Now you had automated plows and all the other equipment built to both speed up and minimize human labor involved. So Industrial Revolution changed the world, no question about it. And one of the effects it had was that instead of everyone being around an agrarian, a communion around farms, you could build communities elsewhere because you can get the food from other places. So it really created the world of what we call today the transmigration, that's able to travel and other capacities to be able to move to other parts of the world, and including the technologies of travel that allow us to do that, but also the ability to transport foods and other needs. And then we enter the 20th century, and we ultimately into what some people call the atomic revolution. They call it the computer revolution at some point, where it changed. The new dimension was here now, where we are today. Essentially, you can sit in one little space in your life and get everything you need. Amazon Prime is starting to make that even more convenient, and it's only going to accelerate. Now, what does that mean in terms of on a more ideological level? What does it mean? Essentially, technologies that developed really create more unity than separation. Even though it's true, there was a time when people lived near the farms and on farms and so on, they were together and they built a community, but they were not connected to anyone else in the world. It was not a global village. And today we live in a completely different world. Because of technology, we're able to connect with anyone, anywhere, anytime. Now, this was not so accelerated till now. If you go back 100 years, let's say, in the beginning of radio and television, what was its main power? The power that you could be one place and hear something from another place. Telegraph was also part of the earlier stage of that. Radio, then television, not just hearing, but seeing. But whatever it was in the 1920s and the 30s and 40s, you can't even compare it to today. Because there, as advanced as it was, it still doesn't have what we have today. Today, literally, you can be anywhere and access anything, anytime. That was not the case. Television, the news came on at 7 o'clock, that's when you watched it. There was no streaming, there was no replay, no instant replay, etc., etc., etc. And I'm not going to go through all the details. What we have today is very clear. So you can really say this is a march of progress from fragmentation, or from, you can say, even the word diversity toward harmony. That's the way let's call it, someone looking at it from the bigger picture would look at it. A march toward a deeper unity. I understand we've had greatest wars in the 20th century. You could say, how is that consistent? We'll get to that in a moment. Let's talk, that's on the technological level. Let's talk about the political level. On the political level, basically pre-300 years ago, societies were run, and communities and countries were run by monarchs. Single, one man or one woman dictator that controlled entire population of millions of people, or hundreds of thousands of people. And they had the final say. There was no such thing as individual rights. No one had rights. The king or the queen or the czar or the emperor or whatever it was had those rights. Now, you could throw into there also a certain interesting partnership between religion and some of these monarchs, some of them because of the church. So the church had this absolute power. That's what, with the founding of the United States of America, the Russian Revolution, the American Revolution, French Revolution is somewhat similar. Something happened that changed everything. Was suddenly the individuals were recognized for their individual rights. It was non-existent. I remember when the New York Times published a special edition of for the millennium, when it turned 2000, so the distinction between the first millennium and the second millennium. And one thing that was the main center focus was the concept of privacy. The concept of individual rights did not exist 500 years ago. People even lived together in one house. There wasn't even an expectation that you had the dignity of personal rights and personal space. And that was reflected in the political systems, that one person can control your life. One decree can change everything. Everything can be confiscated. Anything can be given to you. It was a completely unfair and centralized type of power, but completely not recognizing individuality and individual strengths. With the birth of democracy and the other sweeping changes that happened in Europe and throughout the world, what changed dramatically was suddenly the recognition of individual rights. But the recognition of individual rights created a new dilemma. And the dilemma is that, here the king was making the choice. The monarch, the despot, the fascist, whatever, was making choices, so people really didn't have any much to say. So you could say he united the whole nation. But it was really a very superficial unity. It wasn't because everyone agreed, it's because nobody had a voice. Now that everyone has a voice, how do you prevent anarchy? Which was really the argument, actually, one of the legitimate arguments of Marx and others that advocated the idea of central control, because people don't know what they want. You need one person, the leader, the supreme leader, to be the one that makes decisions for people. But that did not hold because for many reasons. But now came the other challenge. What do you do with all this diversity? If everybody says whatever they want, then how do you have some type of order, social order? So this was the challenge that capitalism faced, as other systems faced, and ultimately came down to that we need to find a balance between diversity and harmony, which is what we deal with in this country all the time. The issue of, let's say, free speech. Okay, you have free speech, but what can you say can you say something that will offend another person? Can you say something that will instigate violence? So we struggle with this. Remember the Skokie Nazi marches in Skokie. So on one hand, everyone agreed you can't curb freedom of speech, but everyone was also repulsed by suddenly Nazis can get up and say whatever they want to say. And it was never really resolved, to be honest. Ultimately, the federal department deferred it to the states. The states deferred it to the cities, and ends up happening is every community has to deal with this. There are communities that will not allow certain books in their libraries because they'll say they're inciting, and others will. So we haven't really resolved it. But what has happened, that we do have overall, we found something that is called looking for some type of balance, again, a form of unity, but not a unity based on superficial power of one individual, where ultimately there's a wisdom of the crowds, and because of coexistence or other reasons we can explain, we learn to work together. Now, are there downsides? Absolutely, there are big battles going on. There's polarization, especially today, political and so on. But let's just look for a moment at the Jewish people. We are as argumentative as they come, no question about it. Jews argue, they have different opinions, passionate different opinions. I can tell you as a speaker, you speak to an audience, I can immediately tell, their audiences, they sit and listen, they don't, and they more or less absorb what you say. Then certain audiences, they're shaking their heads, doesn't know what he's talking about. Or, I like it, I don't like it. You could tell who's Jewish in an audience very quickly. But the point I'm making here is, and yet, though we have our challenges and we have our divisiveness, God forbid, and we have our disagreements, but you can see communities that have, I have brothers and sisters, we disagree fundamentally about things, but there's a love. And I think that's a vital component. So the diversity is not a contradiction to unity. Divisiveness is. When you personalize it, selfishness is. So in a way you can say the political advancement toward a world of freedom was not moving from one central power to suddenly anarchy. It was really moving from one central power and ignoring individuality to a place where now we have to really figure it out as individuals. Can we coexist? And it's up to us. So there's no question it's advancement, even though there are still Those argue that, you see, democracy is just destroys the people because you give them all the options. They only will choose. This is the argument of some Muslim extremists, as others, that religion is the one that should dominate. People should not be free-thinking, independent individuals. But the fact of the matter is, the waves of freedom have consumed the world, and countries continue to become more respecting more individuality than ever before. So I would definitely say this as advancement. That's on the political front. And on this technological front I spoke about, what else? I said economic as well. Today economics is global, no longer local. It's not just about trading with your neighbor. It's something that we have to figure out how to work with, and we're going through our own growing pains. Do you take an approach like we see now the debates raging about being a global economy or more of a national economy, with Trump imposing tariffs and China imposing tariffs in return, and trade wars or no trade wars or whatever is going to happen? Or do we just accept the fact that even though we have boundaries, but we have to realize that we are really like one global village? And I'm not getting into now the opinions on both ends of the story. Everyone has their arguments. But regardless, there's no question that we're a global economy. There's no question that we have become a global village. So in all the ways, everything I've described so far, if you look at the patterns, and again, I'm not talking about from year to year. Year to year, there's ups and downs. If you look at the general, if you would make a graph from the year, let's say, 16th century till today, you'll see it all gravitating from separation and to unity. It's most seen, obviously, in the area of technology and science, but you could see it in every other area as well. However, there's one big dilemma here, which is the big X variable, unknown, and that is the human being. We are the ones that always mess it up, because technology, you can figure out all the laws of nature and you can figure out how to unify them all, but how do you deal with human beings who refuse to work together? Human beings who are selfish, narcissism, and stuff like that. So you could have all the advancements in the world, and we could live in a world, if you look at all the aspects of the world, politically, technologically, economically, and so on, they all are gravitating to more unified places. But human beings, let's look at our life. Let's look at this world that we live in. On one hand, there's no question there's less wars and less violence than ever before, despite everything that you see happening. Yes, absolutely. Steven Pinker, who even though he makes an argument based, a godless argument, but he has very good statistics. If you look at these different organizations that measure the amount of wars and the amount of people dying, it's less than ever before. This does not mean that we don't have violence. We've seen violence in schools and we've seen the Muslim extremism. But we're talking about in totality and we're talking about the trends. You can look it up. This is not something I'm saying based on faith. This is a common knowledge today. I'll go a step further. There's an organization called Freedom House. They measure countries by their level of freedom, meaning how much people have freedom. And you see there that if you go back 50 years ago, you'll find maybe out of the 250 countries in the world, 80 or 100 were non-free. They divided by three: totally free, semi-free, and totally non-free. Totally non-free would be North Korea, obviously. China would be also probably much non-free, even though economically they're a little more democratic, but it would still be non-free from a point of view of ideology and free ideas and so on. And it's constantly going from less and less countries to becoming more and more countries being free. Now, are there dips? Yes, there are. There are setbacks, so it's not like a straight line up. It's dips and changes, but better, more or less speaking, a better world. Now, I have to qualify this. I know, God forbid, anyone that suffered a tragedy, anyone that's seen a murder, obviously says that's the worst thing possible. That we've never had students being killed in schools. It's true that we may not have had that, but we had some things that were worse. Remember, 120 million people were killed in World War I and World War II, just less than 100 years ago. So you're talking about numbers. That doesn't mean that we don't count by numbers. Obviously, every murder is a murder. But if you talk about a trend, it's very clear where we stand today. And now I want to just say this because I think this is vital. We as a Jewish people are perfect examples of this. You show me in history a time like now where we are able to practice our religion, our faith, our holidays without any hindrance. We could sit here, nobody waiting to arrest us, nobody's out there outside taking informants and so on. It doesn't exist. Is there anti-Semitism? Yes, there is. But is there institutionalized attempt to try to round up Jews? No. I know some will argue, they said the same thing in Europe, in Germany, and they said the same thing in the golden age of Spain. But I'm not just a believer. I've heard this from my teachers, and I've heard this, and I absolutely accept that it's not the same. It's really not the same. This doesn't mean that we're 14, 15 million strong in a world of 7 billion people. But there are many things that are very, very different than ever before. Besides the fact that we have Israel and an army and all that way to protect ourselves, we're in a different world. So for us, it's no question, we are the greatest beneficiaries of the advancements of history. Based on basically, you can send your children to any school you like, you can teach them any values you wish, and there's absolutely no one that can stop you, and no one wants to stop you. So any resistance we have is from within. This is should be never taken for granted. There's no question our grandparents would look at this world and say it's messianic, because they never had such a thing. For them, that what they had were holocausts, or pogroms, or inquisitions, or crusaders. I mean, do you know how many, that they say there's more Jewish blood in the rivers in Europe than water? The pogroms that went on, unpredictable, and when and where. They lived constantly under the gun. If there was a year of respite, it was just a fluke. So in history, you tell me, did we ever have a period like this? And maybe during King Solomon's era, there was maybe a few years like that. But since when we left Egypt, we've never had really sustainable peace. And there's no reason to believe it's going to change in the near future. And as believers, we know it won't change because the world is hurtling toward a better place. And that's what, of course, I'm leading to. So what I did right now till now is really mapping out history and where we stand today. We stand today in a very unified world, except in one final frontier, human beings. Because here's the tragic statistic. Family life, home life, marriages, parents and children, perhaps in unprecedented ways, are not united. We have a higher rate of divorce than ever before. Even people who are married, technically, are emotionally divorced. We have children and families that do not get along with each other. But this has nothing to do with historical trends. This has to do with the final frontier, which is the human being.
Has that been always the case?
I was going to just mention that, actually, that some argue it was always that way. Okay, I was going to say that even if it was always that way, it's still that way. In other words, the unifying of other factors have not changed that. In other words, Facebook and Google and Amazon and Apple, the four horsemen, right, have not made marriages better, have not made parents and children have better relationships. So let's even argue it was always that way. But my point I really want to make is that it doesn't affect the personal, because we have to make that choice. Obviously, the big part of my focus is talking about the future is going to be our role in it, because our role is vital. Because if we don't do anything about it, you can have the best technology. We could be sitting here and be connected to everyone in the world, but that doesn't mean you and I emotionally are connected. Well, I'll get back to that in a few minutes. The point I want to make here is this, that if you look at it from a global perspective, a bird's eye view, the way I would put it is that a stage has been set. We have the capacity today to literally unite the world for good. But the final frontier is going to be, what are we going to do with it? Because most people are using technology not to create more personal unity. They're looking at technology to either enrich themselves, or to entertain themselves, or to just waste time, frankly. And the final frontier is going to be exactly that, how we're going to use it to be a platform for an inner unity. I have a sociologist friend I know, and I asked him, how does sociologists measure a standard, the quality of a society, the welfare of a society? And his response is, they're basic benchmarks. They include the longevity and life expectancy, how many people have health insurance, the standard of living, the GDP, and a few other things like that, mostly economic and physical. And he said, based on that, we live in the best possible society. It's never been as prosperous as we have it today in all those areas. And he asked me, so how would you measure it? I say, we, as a Jew, as a Torah measurer, I would say there's only one measure, the welfare of our families. Healthy children, healthy relationships, committed, trusting relationships, love, nurturing, and all that goes with that. So I remember he somewhat burst out in some laughter, and he said, well, based on that, we may be the worst society, because it definitely has not gotten better. So it's just interesting, very two different benchmarks of but that gives you the whole picture. You can have literally the best home, but the home can be full with strife. I know someone who grew up in a very wealthy home. Her father was a multi-billionaire in France. They had an island in Greece even that they owned. And she told me, our home we had everything. It was like nothing missing, but there was no love. I came home after school, there was no one there except my 5 nannies. My mother wasn't there, my father wasn't there. It was love. It was a big palace, but it was a lot of light, but it was completely emotionally dark. The way she phrased it, was the contrast. So we can have beautiful platforms, and we can have the most beautiful front packaging and the front end, but the back end can be a mess.
Actually, we use the technology to communicate with our children at a much higher rate than we could have without the technology.
No, of course, absolutely. No, that's exactly what I'm leading to. Now, this doesn't mean technology is the source of our problems. It means that technology does not solve our problems if we don't solve our problems. I used to say, I don't know if they still say it with computers, they say junk in, junk out. Garbage in, garbage out. You put garbage into a computer, it'll process it very quickly, and you'll get a lot of garbage very quickly, faster than ever before. I think I remember there was a website, and I don't know if it still exists, it was called uselessinformation.com. I kid you not. It was very interesting. But you looked at it, it was completely useless. It was intriguing trivia, but it was useless. So junk in, junk out. On the other hand, if you want, like exactly as you said, I saw it here in the hall, and I see it with myself. My children, some of my grandchildren live in California. When they FaceTime us or Skype us, or what do we do today? What's the other imagery today? FaceTime. What's the other WhatsApp? I don't know. All these video things. Unbelievable. I stop everything just to smile with my kids and make funny faces, whatever it is. So of course technology has the power to connect in ways that are unprecedented. But that's up to us when we use it that way, which is, of course, where I'm leading to. But there's almost a disproportionate rift that many people will say, have we ever been as emancipated, as free as today? You sit with a phone, here's my phone. I can contact anyone right now without moving. Unbelievable freedom. But how many of us are addicted to this gadget here? And it controls us, or you control it? So at some point, the thing that was supposed to free us becomes our master. And the paradox is so apparent. This is supposed to connect us. How many people do you know that technology has really made deeper connections? You love your grandchildren, you love your children, and therefore when technology comes in, it helps you connect with them. But if you don't have that connection, you can have all the best machines. I know people who don't talk to their children whether they have technology or they don't have technology. I was sitting in a car with a friend. We were being driven to a wedding. I hadn't seen him in many years. I thought we'd catch up. He's busy texting. Okay. I keep on nudging him. I keep making him uncomfortable. No, he's busy texting. So finally I said, you know what? I'm going to text him. I'm kidding. So I text him. He's sitting right here. I'm sitting here. I text him. Say, hi, haven't seen you in a long time. How you doing? What are you up to? And he's sitting near me. He looks at his phone. And he's probably doing 100 different texts. And then he looks to me, he's completely disoriented a bit because it doesn't make sense. I'm sitting here. He says, are you texting me? I said, yes, I'm texting you. He says, I'm sitting right near you. Why are you texting me? I said, because I can't get your damn attention. She says, okay, I'll get back to you. Okay, I'll get back to you by text. Fine. It was funny, but it captured the moment. I didn't take it that personally, but that's the story. So technology is a completely neutral. It means technology is like a knife. You can use it to cut a challah. You can use it, God forbid, to hurt someone. It's completely amoral, neutral. it's not going to tell you to be a good person or not a good person. If you are a good person and you use it, it becomes a tool for tremendous good. Viral good, if you wish. And if not, it can be a force of tremendous evil. And it could be just neutral and nothing, useless in that sense. Just another machine. So the point I'm making here is that if you look at the independent forces, independent of the human for a moment, everything, the stage is set for a tremendous world, universe, where you can literally abolish all the evils of the world if we were all united in that front. But that's the fact that that's the only thing God cannot do for us or won't do for us, which is our choice. Because that does come down to our partnership here. We do have a partnership. So if you're able to predict, use the words, a vision for tomorrow is basically a world of total unity where we have 7 billion people on this planet and everybody recognizes their divine mission. Everybody's unique and indispensable. Like I said, freedom of individuality. We're not talking about mind control. We're not talking about anyone telling us what to do. Everyone is aligned with why they're here in this world. And exactly like a ensemble, like a orchestra. You have hundreds of different instruments and hundreds of different players, but everyone's playing their song, and everyone needs everyone else to get the music right. So when it comes your turn, you need to do what you have to do. And then you know that the next step is the next musician who will complement what you're not doing, and you will complement them. So imagine for a moment, we talk about imagine, to dream. To dream for a moment a world that is driven by that type of harmony within diversity. The technologies and the platforms and the tools are all in place to achieve that. The only thing missing is, are we going to cooperate? So as the human being, there's this great raging debate whether machine versus man. With AI developing artificial intelligence, what will happen? Will machines destroy man or will they not? And you see this. There are thinkers who say, yes, machines will outlast us, not only outlast us, will outmaneuver us because we'll become negligible. Machines can do everything that humans can do today. So we'll lose our jobs, and we'll lose our opportunities, and machines will take over. What will humans do? Many will lose their value in a way. There are others that say it's not the case. Humans have learned to conquer everything in this world, even wild animals, so we'll also learn to conquer or control the machines. And then, of course, you have the science fiction scenarios, like The Matrix and others, where machines will go to war with man because they will have enough intelligence to do so. I'm not going to now speculate on different possibilities, but I will say the following. I have one response to that whole debate. And a debate among serious thinkers. Some have a very doomsday version of it, that we will ultimately destroy ourselves with these great machines, and others have a positive outlook. My response would be very simple. It all depends how you see the human being. If we are machines, sophisticated machines, then yes, more sophisticated machines can replace us. If we're, however, more than machines, which I would call we are souls, and we have a spiritual vision, and we have a spiritual mission, no machine is ever going to replace that. Now, some people actually think humans are machines. We're sophisticated machines. We're complex machines. But at the end of the day, there's even called machine theory about human spirit, that it's all a machine. Who built the machine and how it got here is another discussion. So, of course, then a better machine, of course, replaces an older machine. Just like a iPhone 8 is going to replace iPhone 7 at some point. However, if we have a dimension to us that is not machine-like, it is we'll call soul-like, which means it does think in terms of what is the purpose of things. It thinks in terms of a vision, of a spirit, of kindness, of innovative ways of being better people. So you can program machines to support you in that, but you can never replace that because that comes from a place that it's not quantifiable in machine form. I rue the day where someone will say, what? Would you like to have a virtual mother instead of a real mother? What does that mean? A doll that acts and feels like flesh, just like a mother, and nurtures you and cradles you and nurses you and does everything a mother does. And they could even program it to be a little spontaneous. And do some things, But think about it. Even I'm sure there's some people think it's perfectly fine. Actually, I once said it in a talk, and someone said to me, actually, my mother is that way already. And she's not even virtual. I got that. I understand. But a mother, the way a mother is supposed to be, or a father, and yes, you could have a father sitting there at the head of a Pesach table, and it could be virtual. You're saying, Tata, I'll ask you the 4 questions, and the father will answer you, and do it with a smile, and even maybe hug you. But you all get what I'm saying. I don't even know how to put it in words. I don't even know if I have to put it in words, it's already a problem. There's something about the human that's human and that we'd like to retain. If you think of it in terms of from a Torah Jewish point of view, it's the soul, the neshama. No machine has a neshama. And you can put into brilliance, and you can make it be predictable. It can know every scenario. It can be the best chess player on earth. But a heart and soul, it could emulate. We can teach it to copy humans. But there's some things that are absolutely relegated and remain in the domain of the spirit that no machine can be played because it didn't come from a machine. Machines are built by people, and humans were built by God. That's the little difference. We were created in the divine image. So if you look at the future, I'm just looking at the time right now. Where are we? Okay, we're fine. If you look at the future, I'm going to put it into context with a few examples. There's an expression, this is actually from Maimonides. He says that in the future, there will be no longer famine, and no more war, no more jealousy, and no more unhealthy avarice competition.
This is after Mashiach.
Hold on. But he says that this is a world that does not need any miracles. This is a world that we are evolving toward. And he continues and says it'll be a world where its entire business will be to know God. In other words, materialism will not be an end in itself. It'll be a means to have higher state of consciousness, the way I would translate it, higher awareness. And cites the verse in Isaiah that actually we'll be saying in the Haftarah, the last day of Pesach, will be no longer evil or destruction in this world. Why? Because the world will be filled with divine knowledge as the waters cover the sea. Now, if you read that verse, most people say we live in an information age, information revolution, a world of knowledge. Not divine knowledge, but knowledge. And yes, it's like the waters cover the sea. As a matter of fact, it's so inundating that we're living in a world of information overload. Now, if you think about it, how did Isaiah, the prophet, 3,000 years ago, or a little less than 3,000 years ago, know about that? How could he predict such a stage? How exactly was knowledge going to be all over the world? Now, he didn't have technology then, so it was a prophecy. But we are living exactly in that type of state of world, where knowledge can fill the entire world instantaneously. What they call viral today. You can have a message that can reach 7 billion people, hypothetically. That's a big number, fine. But you can reach billions. Facebook has 2 billion followers. 2 billion. Now take away children and babies, that's more than half the adult population of the universe, with all their challenges. And in concept, there's no reason you can't reach 4 billion. And without any miracle. You don't need a God to come and broadcast the message. We have the tools to do so. Obviously, you need to figure out how to actually do it, but you can do it. No one will say it's a miracle. You would tell this to someone 50 years ago, 100 years ago, even 30 years ago, they'd say, what are you talking about? Besides the billions of dollars you'd need to buy advertising, you couldn't even reach most people. And today, it's a completely practical thing. What's missing is what information is being streamed through these pipes. But the pipelines are laid out. When you take the political landscape, as I described, we have a political landscape again. If we were living in times of Hitler now, Yamach Shemoy, or times of Stalin, or times of the Tsars, or the kings, even if we had all these technologies, you'd say, very nice, but they control everything. We don't have that either. Every individual can really do whatever they want. If you decide to figure out how to develop a certain technology or a message, and for some reason you figure out how to get it viral, you can reach billions of people, and no one even knew who you were a day before. So you have that in place. And as far as economics involved, it doesn't even cost anything. I mean, you need a little money, but it's not at all commensurate. We have posted on YouTube, just myself, my videos. We have literally thousands, maybe 7,000, 8,000 videos up on YouTube, free, stored. I asked my office to calculate how much that would cost if we bought such storage. I don't want to tell you, the numbers are in the millions of dollars. The amount of just our videos. So it's a very interesting world at our disposal. Are we taking advantage of it? Absolutely not. We're taking advantage of it perhaps for personal reasons and other stuff, but not on any global scale. So for someone to say you cannot transform the world today with the message of God, with the message of Torah, with the message of universal spirituality, universal goodness and kindness, no. Today there's no longer resistance on the platform level. The platforms are there. The only thing that's missing is our mentality. We're still living in the previous primitive age, so to speak, in how we think. We don't think like that because it takes time to catch up. And we're also focused on our own survival. So when I heard, and I have heard, and I sat at the feet of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, this is what I did for many years, listened to his talks on Shabbos and Yom Tov and holidays, had to be remembered because there were no recorders and no tape and no notes. And when he began, and he would talk about this on an ongoing basis. Earlier years a little lesser, later years accelerated. To me, it was always very clear. It wasn't the Messianic talk, as I said at the beginning. That's why I told the story. I never saw some Mashiach thing that was like an exotic. I saw it exactly that the world is getting more and more ready. The platforms are laid out for us to do what we need to do to spread that message of goodness and kindness to all people, Jews through their lens and the non-Jewish world through theirs. And it's just up to us. That's what he said. It's up to you. To me, it was always like so obvious. And that's what a visionary is about. He's ahead of his time. He sees the possibilities. Whether we see it yet, no, the Jewish world definitely doesn't. The non-Jewish world also not. There are individuals. In the 60s, there was talk, Age of Aquarius. It was more actually through psychedelics that some people came to understand a better world than through traditional means. Go explain why. Maybe that was the way God's sense of humor to figure out when you have no other way. That's what you do. But the concepts that captured so many minds and so many souls, and that was really the essence of Judaism. What do you think? Judaism attracted people like Moses and Abraham. You're talking about tremendous pioneers because they saw it not just as rituals following God's laws, they saw it as changing the world, that we're leading to a better world. So actually, from talk about Messianic vision, there are really 4 schools of thought that talk about how the Messiah will manifest, Messianic age will manifest. One is, there's 4 schools of thought. One is that will come in a violent way, through an apocalypse, but it will be passive, meaning it won't come through humans, it will be God leading the way. Through a massive war, destroying the wicked, and so on. This is called, in the language of Christianity, the apocalypse, or what they call the passion, and other things There's another approach that will be, humans will be involved in this violent approach, they will lead the war. 2 schools of thought. Both are not Jewish. Another school of thought is that Mashiach will be passive, but peaceful. Which means there will be a point where God says, time has come to bring the world to a better place. And we are not involved, we're just bystanders. And there's a 4th school that says peaceful, but interactive, means we are involved in the unfolding drama. I put it in this context because it's the 4th opinion that is the most quintessentially Jewish. There are some Jewish people who feel it's number 3, but if you look at all the sources, it's number 4. And I'll use a site, the Rabbi Shneir Zalman of Liadi in Tanya, in the beginning of chapter 37, he says these words: the Messianic age will be an age where the divine consciousness will be all-consuming, omnipresent, but that is achieved through our actions. When you put a piece of food in your mouth, yes, the food even that we eat here, and you make a blessing on it, and you focus and say, the energy I'm getting from this food is going to be used for productive purposes. In the language of the Kabbalists, you're redeeming the sparks inside the food, and you are essentially revealing the divine within this physical piece of food. And that is a small piece of Mashiach, right there. Now, when we do this, the same thing in our businesses, in our interactions, everything we do, b'chol drachecha de'eu, in all your ways you shall know God, even when you're taking a walk in a garden, even when you're just doing something that seems casual, there's always seeing the divine hand inside it. You are revealing a little piece of Mashiach. And when it all accumulates like building blocks, that's when it erupts into a world like ours.
Question.
Just-
Is Mashiach a concept or a person?
I'm going to answer that. I'll answer that question. Just bear with me. So this is the next key thing, which is another major distortion. Because Christianity is so dominant, it has spilled over even in Jewish thinking and distorted something. In Christian thought, and I'm only bringing it as for contrast purposes, the idea of a Messiah is a person that will return. Happens to be a Jew. Happens to be an Orthodox Jew, if you really want it to be ironic. Yeah, someone that looks more like me than like them. Okay? Probably a longer beard than I have. So is a person arriving, second coming, they call it, and that will usher in the world. In Judaism, the geula is the key word, is a process, is the end of a process that will lead into events, but it's not defined by the event, it's defined by the process. And the process began, when? The first moment that Adam and Eve were placed on earth. Because when they started doing their first acts, good acts, they were starting to reveal what we call the messianic energy. I'll use even more secular language, the unifying energy. To unify a fragmented world that should all serve one purpose, the divine purpose for which God created every part of this universe. And every step of the way, from Adam and Eve all the way through history, that was the driving ethos, that was the driving vision. Now, of course, human sin, human iniquities, and the things we did, obviously, can also cause the process to be slowed down or even be concealed. Because when we live selfishly, instead of, as I said, using that piece of food, and you use the energy to be destructive or just for personal gain, you're not revealing its divine purpose. So think of life as a machine, life itself, and the universe as the big machine of life. Is this machine aligned to the way the cosmic engineer, engineered this machine? When you're doing a mitzvah connection, you're connecting the machine to the operator's manual, which is the Torah, and aligning it. When we all do that and it accumulates, the result is a messianic world. Now, just like someone would ask the question, is the exodus from Egypt, Pesach, is the main primary thing the exodus that we left Egypt, or that Moses led us out of Egypt? The answer is obvious. The main thing is that we left. But God happened to choose a man called Moses to lead us. That's exactly the same view with the future redemption. The redemption is more than just an event. It's the end of a process. And yes, there will be a leader. That's what we're told in the book of Isaiah and hundreds of different prophecies. And then Maimonides quotes it, just like a Moses, who will lead us. Just like you have a leader who inspires, who directs, who guides, who's a mentor. But the main change, of course, is the change of the world, the universe. And there's the change. Who will be exactly like Pesach? Jews left Mitzrayim, but they had a leader who led the way. And there's no contradiction. The focus is not on the leader, the focus is on the events. And the leader, obviously, is the leader to that. So God is the one that decides when this will happen. But here's the fascinating thing, what I wanted to go back to, why I mentioned 1840. The Zohar predicts a prophecy, a prophetic vision. It says that, it doesn't say the year 1840, it says in the Hebrew year, 5,500. Okay? 5,600, I'm sorry. 5,600 corresponds to the year 1840. That in that year, there will be an explosion of knowledge from above, an explosion of knowledge from below, like floodgates will open up, and will flood the world with a new unprecedented information. And all the commentaries explain it will be both the divine information, spiritual information, as well as scientific information. That's what the Zohar predicts in the chapter Noach. That's what it describes. And the explanation it gives is because as the world hurdles and, as I said, travels towards this destination, there comes a point where this unity starts taking hold. Now, this is an interesting thing that no historian or scientist can figure out. Why is it, usually knowledge that's accumulative, so then you have different innovations that should happen through a period of time. Why is it that suddenly, approximately in the year 1840, in the 19th century, and only accelerating since, there's been an explosion of innovations and inventions far disproportionate to all the discoveries over the past 1,000 years before that, like electricity, the combined, you name it. Because logically, what should have happened is there were great scientists in the times of the ancient Greeks, and they discovered many things, but it was more sporadic. Then there was suddenly an explosion that was completely disproportionate. There are people who documented it, and nobody can understand why it shouldn't have happened that way. It should have happened much more spread out. Okay, so you could have all kinds of theories. The Zohar's answer would be because yes, the accumulation of efforts that we've done over the years, it comes a point where you get closer to the good eruption of an explosion of knowledge on all levels, scientific as well as spiritual, that's leading the world to a place where there will be this full total fusion. So where do we stand right now, and what can we do? Let me. That will be my final few words about this topic. As you can imagine, I'm trying to do justice to it, but it really requires much more than an hour. But I'll give you some of the highlights, which I find fascinating, and I hope you do as well. So where do we stand now? Well, those that have a bird's eye view see, and you connect the dots, and you step away from immediate news, because no immediate news is not going to give you much information. You look at the bigger picture. Yes, you see platforms that are there in place for us to literally bring global transformation. No question about it. In a positive way. So really what's missing is us. Will we align ourselves to future thinking like that? Or will we be stuck with the same old little self-oriented and self-absorbed life that most of us live? Now the consequences today are a lot different than they were in the past. In the past you lived in a shtetl, you lived in a small town. The only thing you can really do is bring up a healthy family and build a good, strong Jewish community. But today we do have the connections and the abilities to reach far more than that. So, in addition to our building strong communities and our families, we have opportunities that were never there before. And when you say words, will we be a light unto nations? Today it's literal. You can be a light unto nations. And yes, you can bring a message of goodness and kindness to literally millions, if not billions of people. And if you think of it in a marketing context, you can segment audiences and target them with particular messages, educate people, inspire people, motivate them to raise the standard of their personal, psychological, emotional, and spiritual lives. So after the agricultural revolution, the industrial revolution, and the computer revolution, we can say that we are now at the stage at the threshold of the spiritual revolution, where the focus is not on making money as an end in itself, not on material success, but in the words of Maimonides, that all those are stepping stones to a higher goal. These are means. They are means for us to be agents of spiritual change in this world. And everyone here in this room is not exempt. Every one of us is responsible for this. This is why we were charged to be here in this time.
That's all a big job, by the way.
I'm giving myself a big job too. By the way, it's a big job, but it's also a small job. This does not mean that you have to suddenly press a button and reach billions. Why don't you try reaching 50 people, 30 people? Remember, at the end of the day, 7 billion people in this world are a bunch of individuals like us. There's just a lot of them. And they are struggling with the same things we struggle. They want to build healthy families. They want love in their lives. They want some truth. They want something that has some values. We may have differences, but the fundamentals are very, very similar. I always say this, really, I'm going a little off course where I want to go, but I say to myself, when you look at what's going on, let's say, in the Muslim world, where they dominate and give the impression that religion is about extremism. And this is what Christians did for hundreds of years as well. It was violent. The Crusaders were violent. They wanted to impose their form of faith. And maybe there were some Jews that may have done something, but if you really look at it, Abraham prayed for infidels. I look at ourselves and I say, why aren't the Jews, the people of the book, getting up and being the moral paragons and the shining example of what it means to be a righteous individual, a moral individual? Israel's biggest export should not be technology or beautiful women. It should be Kimitzian Seitzit Torah Dvar Hashem Yerushalayim. That from Zion comes Torah and the Word of God. When you read a prophecy that says, look at this beautiful prophecy, and everyone can relate to it. It says, days are coming when the man will not be hungry for food, for bread, or thirsty for water, but for the words of God. People want this today. You have to be careful when you say the word God because it has all the stereotypes. But food and drink is physical sustenance. Spiritual message is spiritual sustenance. And that is what builds beautiful families and beautiful homes and beautiful children. And we have the technologies that help us get there. Are there challenges? Absolutely. And I say again, I don't think I could pack everything in here in 1 hour to do justice to it. But I hope I did enough to at least make you a little uncomfortable to feel that maybe you should do something. And I speak to myself as well, that I should do something more than I have done. But I feel honestly almost responsible. Well, not almost, actually responsible. Not responsible because I witnessed this and I understood it and I heard it from my great teacher. And I feel it would be a disservice if I had not shared that we have this responsibility today. And it's doable. It's absolutely doable. So thank you very much. May we use this Pesach to be a, Nisan Nigalu, Nisan Asidin Liga. Passover is meant to be a stepping stone toward the final redemption. Don't think of it as a distant future. It's a reality that we can make happen now. Thank you so much. I see they're coming to Daven Mincha now? Is now Mincha? Oh, okay, great.